Hey guys, I'm going to talk about ancient Egypt today, and especially the pyramids. This is a subject that some of my subscribers requested, and I love it too. So let's go for it. Before I start, just wanted to draw your attention to the description of the video where you can vote for one of the next topics you would like me to discuss. You have several options and you can pick one. Everyone who wants to participate in the vote is welcome. You can vote in the comments and I will close the vote on the 1st of March. Okay, so as you know, the pyramids are like the symbol of ancient Egypt, but interestingly enough, they are also among the oldest monuments built by this civilization. Actually, all the famous pyramids were built in the 3rd millennium before Christ, long before Egypt disappeared as a civilization, so that even for the Egyptians in the 1st and 2nd millennium before Christ, the pyramids were already antique monuments, and I'm going to try to explain how and why these pyramids were built. You may know that generally, to make the history of ancient Egypt more easy to follow and understand, it has been cut into several dynasties. There are 30 dynasties, and this system was invented, created by an Egyptian historian called Manetho in the 3rd century before Christ. Just 3 centuries before Egypt as an independent state disappeared. You may know that Egypt declined a lot in the 1st millennium before Christ. It was invaded by the Persians, the Persian Empire, and then by the Greeks under Alexander the Great in the 4th century before Christ, when he conquered the Persian Empire, and Alexander the Great installed one of his generals, a man called Ptolemy, on the throne of Egypt. This Greek general gave birth to the last ruling dynasty in Egypt, called the Ptolemaic dynasty, and the most famous sovereign of this dynasty is probably Cleopatra. Cleopatra the 7th, who was also the last sovereign of Egypt, because in minus 30 before Christ, after 3 centuries of Greek ruling, Egypt fell into the hands of the Romans and lost its status of independent state. So Manetho was an historian in the early Ptolemaic period, and he imagined, based on archives, this way of dividing Egyptian history based on dynasties. The system was then reviewed and corrected by modern archaeology, but it remains popular and convenient to present the history of Egypt. Of course, civilization did not appear in the valley of the Nile with the First Dynasty. The First Dynasty starts with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, which had been two independent kingdoms for centuries in a period called the pre-dynastic period, and the unification took place in the 32nd century before Christ, more than 5,000 years ago, giving birth to what is called the archaic or the early dynastic period, that corresponds to the first and second dynasties in Manetho's dividing. And I am telling you this because the ancestors of the pyramids appeared in this pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods under the form of monuments called the mastabas. The mastaba, which is a word of Arabic origin, which means bench in Arabic. The name comes from the shape of these monuments. They were like rectangular buildings with walls, sides that were slightly inclined, and that were built above the tombs of ancient kings or early pharaohs. The tomb was dug into the ground, and above it these large monuments made of stone or brick were erected. The ancient Egyptians used stone only for two kinds of buildings: their tombs, and the pyramids are tombs, or their temples. They used brick for almost everything else, their houses, but also the palaces, including the pharaohs' palaces. And this shows us the very particular importance they gave to funerary rites and to religion in general, which were the only activities that deserved the use of this expensive and hard to find material that stone was for them. So many of these mastabas, because the earlier ones were often made of brick, have disappeared, but with their rectangular shape, with their monumental size too, can be considered ancestors of the pyramids. All the more that during the early dynastic period, this first and second dynasties, mastabas with a second level with a smaller second mastaba built on the first one, started to appear. The next main evolution starts in the Third Dynasty with a pharaoh called Djoser, and he was particularly famous for two things: the pyramid he built, and also his main architect, an architect called Imhotep, who is credited for inventing this large funerary complex in which his pharaoh would be buried. At the beginning of the Third Dynasty, the capital of Egypt was a city just located where the delta of the Nile begins, called Memphis. And actually, when we hear the name Memphis today, that makes us think about Memphis, Tennessee. And that's not a complete coincidence. Memphis in Tennessee was founded, I think, in the 1820s, or maybe slightly earlier, when Egyptomania in the US was particularly strong. I talked about that in another video about Egyptomania that I made 2 or 3 months ago. And Memphis, Tennessee was named after this Memphis that was the capital of ancient Egypt during the ancient empire, the First Dynasties. So Djoser ordered the construction of the first monument that can be called a pyramid on a site called Saqqara, near this ancient city of Memphis. And Djoser's pyramid is a step pyramid, or a proto pyramid, made of several floors, several steps, piled up like several mastabas. There are 6 of them, 6 levels, and for the first time we have a monument really looking like a pyramid. This site of Saqqara was the site where the first pyramids were built, but they looked quite different from the image we have today, like for the pyramids of Giza. I'm going to talk about after. The pyramids were just the main attraction in a complex with a wall around, a temple, sometimes even trees and plants, a system of irrigation. So this complex looked quite different from the image of pyramids lost in the middle of the desert that we have today. They looked very different, and they were not tombs that the men were building in a remote place before forgetting them. The next evolution in the architecture of pyramids happened between the Third and the Fourth Dynasties. We are now 26, 27 centuries before Christ, with the first attempts at building smooth-sided pyramids instead of these early step-sided buildings. And there is an attempt which is quite famous called the Bent Pyramid, built by an early sovereign of the Fourth Dynasty on the site of Dashur near Saqqara, called the Bent Pyramid. It seems that in order to prevent the pyramid from collapsing, the builders had to change the curve, and they had started a pyramid with a quite steep angle and had to shallow it on the second level of the pyramid. But quite rapidly, still under this same pharaoh, Sneferu, the first smooth-sided pyramid was built on the site of Dashur too, and that was just before the construction of the most famous pyramids of Egypt, the Pyramids of Giza near Cairo today, which were built by sovereigns from the Fourth Dynasty, and in particular the most famous one, Khufu, a pharaoh who had a quite long reign and ordered the building of the largest pyramid in Egypt. These pyramids of Giza, and especially the pyramid of Khufu, are the most impressive ever built by the ancient Egyptians. And actually the pyramid of Khufu remained during several millenniums the highest building in the world made by men, and was considered by the ancient Greeks as one of the seven wonders of the world, together with the Hanging Gardens of Babylon or the Lighthouse of Alexandria. This pyramid probably took several decades to build. It is estimated that it could have been built in about 20 years. This is the time indicated by Manetho, this Egyptian historian from the Ptolemaic period, but this estimation has been questioned a lot because he wrote this more than 20 centuries after the pyramid had been built, and however the archaeologists today generally consider that this period of 20 years may be plausible, but we don't exactly know. What the construction of these very impressive pyramids tell us about ancient Egypt is that the whole country was actually under the control of one single man who was powerful enough to order that a large part of the resources produced by the entire country would be invested or used in the building of his own tomb. And this is something that probably never happened again in the history of mankind, seeing one single person having enough power to impose to an entire nation the construction of such a gigantic monument, because it looked so impressive in comparison with the technical means that the Egyptians had. There has been plenty of theories, sometimes quite goofy, about how and why these pyramids of Giza had been built. So you have a bit of everything here, aliens or technical know-how that would have disappeared afterwards. Generally, historians and archaeologists consider that the Egyptians did not have such a high technical knowledge. They were very good architects empirically. They had not modelized architecture like the Greeks would start to do, but they had a very good empirical knowledge, and this may explain the shape of these monuments. A pyramid is probably the only type of building that made it possible to build so high, because the shape allows to share the weight on a large basis, and it would have been impossible in this time to build such high monuments with a different architecture, like a tower, for example. The pyramid was the only option. This does not really tell us why the ancient Egyptians built these large pyramids. Of course, this is a reflection of the incredibly high importance they gave to funerary rites, and it also probably reflects the incredible political power that the pharaohs had in this early period of the history of Egypt. And maybe building these pyramids was not only something they made to get ready for death, it could also have been a political stance to use and show their power and impose it to the rest of the country. When it comes to the building techniques of such impressive monuments, there are several theories, and we don't exactly know. What looks like a credible explanation is that around the pyramid, the Egyptians had built ramps to access the higher levels of the building with a very soft curve, and they could draw the stones up to the higher levels and continue to erect the pyramid. But what we do know is that this construction mobilized thousands of workers. The remains of the workers' village near the pyramids were uncovered, and we know that thousands of workers worked and probably died on this site to make the construction of pyramids possible. Probably that using all the resources of a country that had several million inhabitants was not something sustainable in the long run, because after the construction of the site of Giza, the importance and size of the pyramids quickly declined in the following dynasties, and even though the building of pyramids continued until the 18th dynasty, well after the Old Kingdom, this first era of the ancient Egyptian history, pyramids became smaller and smaller, and new forms of rites were became more popular among pharaohs, in particular with the development of the King's Valley on the site of Luxor today, the capital of Egypt, which had been Memphis in the Old Kingdom period, changed and became this city of Luxor, what is Luxor today. And on the western bank of the Nile, several temples, as well as valleys, one for the kings and one for the queens, were used to dig tombs and bury the pharaohs with their treasures. Maybe, in a sense, this tells us that the power of pharaohs on their country was at its highest point in these early dynasties, when pharaohs were able or dared to channel all the resources of their country to build these monuments, and that the power of pharaohs relatively declined later on, even though they remained until the last centuries in the history of Egypt extremely powerful sovereigns. And this is this story that explains why in Egypt, even today, there are dozens of pyramids built over more than a millennium at various levels around the Nile, that continue to intrigue us. Some are very famous and well studied, like the pyramids of Saqqara or Giza, but there are dozens of other smaller pyramids. Most of them have been explored and discovered, but maybe more secrets and more knowledge is waiting for the archaeologists to discover them. I hope, as usual, you found this relaxing and interesting, and once again I encourage you to vote for the next topic you want me to discuss, and I say bye bye.